This committee, we're starting late at 3, Environment, Education, Sustainability at about 3:12 today, June 15th. And can we have a meeting call to order, please?
And just as a reminder to all who are watching and in attendance, this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the county's YouTube page. Calling the roll, Ms. Simon.
Here.
Ms. Turner.
Here.
Mr. Jones.
Here.
Mr. Schrein.
Here.
Ms. Stevens.
Present.
There is a quorum. Also like the record to reflect that Councilman Miller is in attendance.
Thank you. Do we have any public comment?
No, Madam Chair, no one is signed in.
We do have minutes from May 18th. Can I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Minutes approved. So we have one matter referred to committee today. Can I have this resolution read, please?
Resolution number 2022-0150, authorizing a grant award to Cleveland Water Alliance in the amount not to exceed $1,450,000 to establish the Water Economy Growth Initiative Program, commencing upon contract signature of all parties for a period of 2 years.
Thank you. So who's going to be addressing this? Two?
That would be me, following Mr. Foley.
Okay, so we're going to start off with directors to introduce, and then we'll move on to Zoom. We're going to have part of the committee and via Zoom, so go ahead.
Turn that on, sorry. Mike Foley with the Department of Sustainability, Paul Herdig with Department of Development. This is a grant agreement that the administration wants to make with the Cleveland Water Alliance for a project around water attraction, water test bed work, and water solution work. So I'm going to walk through a little bit what the overview of the project is, and then E.B. Holst, who is from the Cleveland Water Alliance, is on Zoom and is going to walk through in more detail kind of how the dollars would be spent, what the work would be. We also have Catherine Nelson, Christine, I'm sorry, Christine Nelson, I apologize, from Team NEO, who is here, who is part of the grant, the project as well. So I think, as we all know, one of the great attractions that the region has is Lake Erie is in our backyard. We have a lot of fresh water. The Great Lakes in and of themselves have about 21% of all the fresh water in the world. The region as a whole spent a lot of money on water, so we're trying to clean up through our sewer district program, our effluents going into the lake with our combined sewer overflow projects. We've got $26 million a year that's being used to replace sewage systems and water systems and piping systems in the region. There's $300 million gallons of treated waters delivered daily to more than 1.45 million people in the region. So there's a lot of resources regionally that are being spent on protecting the Great Lakes and being able to make sure that we've got fresh water that's being able to be used by folks. As we realize that in the world, there's a lot of water stress in the world, and there are a lot of areas of the country now that don't have the resource we have, which is clean and fresh and abundant water. One of the things we know with climate change that's happening is that, we're going to see, it's kind of the 4 W's we see in the region now. So we're going to see warmer, wetter, wilder weather. So if you compare the last 10 years, in terms of precipitation, we're seeing, the number is, we've seen about a 9-inch increase in precipitation on an annual basis in our region over the last 10 years as we have over the last 100. And the rise and increase is going up. So if you compare it to the last 30 years, it was about a 5-inch increase, and it's gone up about 4% over the last 30 years. So we're seeing more precipitation, more water, more in our region that affect the Great Lakes. We're also seeing lower ice coverage. So because of warmer climate change, we're seeing fluctuations in the water. More evaporation happens sooner and later. So the Great Lakes in and of itself, while we're seeing more wetter hotter weather, we're also seeing fluctuations in lake levels on a quicker basis, and the water's warmer. There's more things that we need to do to protect the Great Lakes, it seems to me, in the long term. So one of the things I think that is important about this project is that while there's money going towards water attraction, there's businesses out there in the world who need water, right? That need lots of water. We've got a lot of water. So can we attract businesses to this region because of our availability of water? But also there's solutions that need to be made in terms of, as the world changes, as climate change changes, there's things that we need to do to protect our Great Lakes or protect our water systems, to have better piping systems, to think about, can we be the center of the world in terms of water, kind of innovation, that we're able to protect water systems better than any place else in the world. So part of what this grant will be doing is working with the Cleveland Water Alliance, Team NEO, to think about both of those things. So protecting the water systems, being the innovation center of the world in terms of, how do we protect water, how do we clean it up, how do we innovate around it, and then also using the fact that we do have a lot of water here to be able to attract business as business needs more available water. So with that, Paul, I don't know if you had anything else.
Thanks. Very briefly, I would simply add to what Mike Foley said, that we do view the presence of the freshwater asset Lake Erie as a business attraction asset. We are not talking about shipping the water away anywhere else. We're talking only about having businesses come here to use the water, which is here. And I would also emphasize that developing this project was a true collaboration between Cuyahoga County, the Cleveland Water Alliance, and Team NEO. So as noted, Christine Nelson is here from Team NEO, as well as the main speaker from Cleveland Water Alliance. But Department of Development wholeheartedly supports this effort. We believe it will, in fact, have a positive economic impact, both using the lake as a test bed and also attracting additional businesses here because of the water. Thank you.
Councilman, I don't know if you want us to just turn it over to Evie.
Sure.
Okay.
We'll move on to Zoom. I don't think are there questions at this point? Okay, we'll move on to Edie on Zoom. Wait, Councilman Miller?
Can you say just a little bit more about what you mean by using the lake as a test bed?
Yeah, EB will walk through that, but there's sensors. We've got more sensors, I think, in Lake Erie than any other fresh body of water in the world. I don't know about acidic, or oceans in the world, but there's, it's measuring temperature, it's measuring flow of, underground, and EB's a lot smarter about this than I am, so I'd rather defer to her. But thinking through how do we, measure changes in pH levels, and what does that mean for products and using water. So I'd rather if EB could answer that question. I think she'll do a much better job than I will.
Great. Well, thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Welcome.
Great. Thank you so much. And just thanks for having me and for accommodating me with really pretty crazy days with COVID again. So I'm very happy to talk you through this really exciting project. And I will share my screen if that's all right. Someone needs to enable me to share my screen.
You should be able to share your screen now. Please try again.
I'm still getting the disabled message.
Okay, hang on one sec then. Okay, try again one more time, please.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. So as my colleagues there at the county introduced this project, this has been a true collaborative project, developing these plans here over the last 2 years almost. And just to give you a little bit of background about some of the key players in the mix, I am from the Cleveland Water Alliance. My name is Evie Holst, and I'm the Director of Clusters and Innovation at the Cleveland Water Alliance. The Cleveland Water Alliance was established in 2014. It's a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we're focused on economic development, economic impact, building upon our freshwater resources, focused on innovation, and also focused on the legacy of expertise we actually have in this region, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about. This is just a sampling of some of the different organizations in our Cleveland Water Alliance community. So we have some real name brand corporations here in this region in the water industry, such as Moen, Parker, Eaton, and Odie corporations. These are just a few, along with many SMEs and startup companies that have been really making some waves in the water industry. We've been winning some awards, but we've also been very busy over the last couple of years. We actually landed a grant from the U.S. Economic Development Administration in September of 2020. And that actual grant, 1.2 million, was one of only 7 nationwide in the blue economy that was provided. And we are the only freshwater focused grant that was made to date. Then we also were able to procure about $3 million from the state of Ohio to support some of our work focused on the water economy here across the state and specifically around Lake Erie. So we're building on some pretty strong assets and pretty strong investments. And because the Cleveland Water Alliance is actually headquartered here in Cuyahoga County, much of our work is actually focused on building out the asset here in Cuyahoga County. So I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. If any of you are familiar with the Cleveland Innovation Project, this is a project of multiple economic development organizations here in the greater Cleveland area that has really been getting behind 3 specific areas of economic traction, economic growth. Big bets is what the Cleveland Innovation Project calls it. One of them is advanced manufacturing or manufacturing 4.0. The second one has been around healthcare and biomedical devices. And the third is around water. So having these 3 areas where we have multiple organizations really coming together to support, help investment, champion one another, and really pull together around these potential economic drivers is an important part of the work that we do. So I also want to acknowledge here, of course, my colleague here from Team NEO, who plays a really critical role in a part of this project as well, in focusing on bringing business interests to invest here in Cuyahoga County. So framing all of our work here really is the vision that we are a global leader in the water economy. And what we mean by that is that Cuyahoga County and Greater Cleveland leverages our freshwater supply, our less than extreme climate. We still have effects that we're seeing over time, but we have a very robust water and utility infrastructure and a legacy of expertise that really enable us to make an impact on regional job growth, on company attraction, and to also steward our watershed assets so that our region thrives for generations to come. And it's this balance that is really a big part of how we focus our collaborative work, because we're not going to have long-term water assets if we are not also stewarding those assets with how we're making an economic impact. So there are 3 key focus areas around this water economy growth initiative. The first is to attract water-intensive businesses. The second is to attract water solutions organizations. And the third is to invest in our testbed and innovation ecosystem to support both of those other agendas. I'm going to walk you through each of these. Altogether, as mentioned, our ask is 1.45 million. So let's talk a little bit about water intensive industries. So many of you have probably heard about the water stress that's been happening out west, California, Colorado, Texas, and also in Oregon and Washington is the last couple of years. And one of the things about that is that we see water intensive industries that have actually set up shop in some locations like that and now are feeling a really very tangible stress on their business operations because they're facing drought conditions, less secure water, less dependable water sources. And whenever you hear about droughts, you can also be sure that there are water quality issues because when there's less water, you have more concentration of contaminants in the water that remains. So one of the things that has also started to come up as a result of these water stress conditions is also threats to power generation. And this means that companies that have a dependency on power, for example, power from the Hoover Dam, where water levels are dropping, their core operations are literally threatened for their business to be able to continue operating in addition to whatever water they may use for the processes of creating their products. As you know, we sit on the Great Lakes. Great Lakes comprise 20% of the fresh water of the whole world. And we have less extreme conditions like you see in this map there at the bottom of the screen where we don't face things like hurricanes. We don't have the wildfires that we hear about in many other parts of the country, as well as drought. And we have, while we do have some conditions that I'll talk about, it does mean that whether we choose to embrace this perspective or not, our region as a whole is being looked at as a potential location to relocate businesses. So one of the key things about this discussion to look at attracting water intensive industries means that we take a proactive view of selecting what kinds of businesses might be a good fit for our economy and our workforce and our supply chain and logistics strengths. And with this in mind, we have a lot to offer. So we have, as I said, a very robust water infrastructure. And of course, the county is directly focused on building out the microgrid power that can provide additional attractive assets to companies looking to move here. So, one of the things that's really important, I think, when we look at water intensive industries, I'll give you an example of examples of what we mean by water intensive industries. Chemical companies are water intensive industries. They use a lot of water in the processing and creation of their products. Also, metals processing, battery manufacturer can be another one. But generally speaking, the water intensive industries that we would be looking at are also industries that already have a history here in this region. And there's a reason for that, and that's because we sit on the shores of so much fresh water. Water intensive industries started our economy here on the Great Lakes. But what that also means is we need to remember our history associated with that. So as many of you know, we had a history of the Cuyahoga River catching fire. And that had to do with contamination that was related to our interfacing of water intensive industries with our freshwater assets. And that's something that we, because of that history, have a very deep legacy of expertise in knowing how to manage those risks and mitigate them. So there are kind of two risks that might be on people's radars when we talk about attracting water-intensive industries. One, which was touched on a little bit earlier before I started to present, is the idea of water withdrawal. So are we looking to attract industries that would actually take our water outside of the region? And the answer is no. We're looking to actually focus on industries that would set up shop here, remain in the region, make use of the water, and then return the water to our watershed. The second thing is that all of the things that we do interfacing with Lake Erie as our water source is covered by the Great Lakes Compact, which rules against any removal of volumes of water from the region. And so this is something that we have very much framing our focus for attracting water-intensive industry. And the third part here is a real focus on the circular economy. And so in the water industry in general, we very often are talking about water reuse, or how do we use water that's fit for specific purposes. And this is an area for potential innovation going forward. For example, some of the types of questions that have been coming up in the water industry all over the world are things like, can we use gray area in our cooling towers for power generation? And obviously we use cooling towers in power generation here in this region. Another example would be, is there a way for our water industry companies to reuse the water that they have already used in their processes? And this is something that is becoming increasingly interesting to industries all over the world. And as we work with water-intensive industries in this region, we have the opportunity to explore some of those potential innovations going forward. So the second risk is that water contamination that I talked about. There are a couple of things that we're doing to mitigate risks on this as well. The first is that we have the sewer district as part of our quote landing crew to help ensure how that we are proactive about how water use companies are interfacing with our water resources. This is the day-to-day role of the sewer district for industries every day, and the companies that we already have in this region, and they are working with us on this project. The second thing is that, as I mentioned before, we have some very deep expertise in the region around how industry interfaces with our water assets. And through the Cleveland Water Alliance, we have the ability to provide proactive access to treatment and remediation expertise from this vast and deep collection of experts in the region. And the third is something that I can go into a little bit more here as I continue, but it's auto enrollment in Cleveland Water Alliance test beds. And what I mean by that is, as part of our package of bringing these companies to this region, you often hear about, having tax incentives and site selection and so forth. But the other thing that we also, from the beginning, have planned on including into that package is that every company we attract is auto-enrolled in a relationship with the Cleveland Water Alliance to work with us to identify and adopt innovations that can help to mitigate some of these risks. So this is really just an overview of what this piece of the project, item number 1 for water-intensive industries, will include. It's really a dollar amount focused on contractor support for the attraction work with Team Iot. Team NEO, in turn, is providing an in-kind match of approximately $100,000 of staff time and resources. But the focus of the work is to differentiate domestic versus international attraction strategy. Some of this work was done about 2 years ago, really looking at where is the intersection of water stress and where are the companies that are water intensive located in those regions. But now it's really time to dive deeper and look at it, differentiating US from international dynamics, as well as looking at climate impact and how much these types of considerations are playing into site selection for companies. In addition, the engagement of contractors will also enable lead generation within these specific regions, and that will be an important part to add into the credibility of the pitch. I'm going to move on next to item number 2, which is growing our water solutions leadership. The water economy has been a really significant part of Cuyahoga County's economy here for quite some time. And we also have some very significant job growth across the skills spectrum. And across the skills spectrum means everything from low skill high school graduates, manufacturing types of jobs, all the way through chemical, advanced degrees, engineering, research, and data. And these are all areas of potential job growth for Cuyahoga County. So when we look at growing the water leadership in this region, we're also looking at attracting companies to this region to contribute to our opportunities. One of the things that I wanted to bring up to all of you is a recent couple of visits that I made overseas to several conferences, which resulted in over 50 new European company contacts that are really intrigued with what we're doing here and very interested in potentially setting up some time and access to our test beds, which I will describe to you here again in a moment. Our investment on this really is to go after companies that can help solve some of the issues that we are seeing here in our region, as well as some of the issues that we have access to helping with the research that have application to other parts of the world. So as an example, many of you may remember that in 2014, we saw a really significant negative impact on the Toledo drinking water utility system that shut down that system for several days and deprived that population from being able to access their drinking water. That shutdown was a result of a harmful algal bloom that released a microtoxin, which was very poisonous within the water system and required very significant and expensive interventions. Since that time, there's been a very high interest from the state as well as the city and across the country because of an increase in toxic algal blooms to be able to identify and predict when toxic algal blooms may occur. Now we have here in Lake Erie, a very shallow of the Great Lakes, one of the shallowest of the Great Lakes, as well as one that's very vulnerable to different types of runoff. And I'll talk a little bit more about this shortly. But what that means is that we not only have an opportunity to bring in innovators to help us identify and provide early warning on these types of issues, but also to help us mitigate some of the types of issues like harmful algal blooms that we see on our lake. And that expertise can come from anywhere in the world. So part of our focus on attracting innovators from around the world is really looking at where are there specific areas of expertise, whether it's applied research or technology innovators in different organizations around the world that we can actually reach out to and ask them to come and help us problem solve and have the opportunity to trial their technology here in the region. And with that, provide logistical support and engaging contract support for helping us to bring these players into town and help us vet them and follow up. This is a key part of our investment in attracting innovators from around the world in water solutions. The third part of this project is our biggest part, and it's really focused on investing in our Innovator ecosystem. And what I mean by that is it's one thing for us to attract different companies from around the world, but we need to make them comfortable and provide them the options they need to actually set up shop here and want to open an office here and add jobs. So we have two main programs. The first two you see on the left, Open Innovation and Test Beds. These are programs that I want to tell you a little bit more about, but I want you also to understand the surrounding ecosystem that makes these programs successful. So if we have organizations come here to want to trial their technology, we also want to be able to offer them space in an office where they can stay and work out of over the duration of their research and product evolution. We also are working on raising money for a seed fund, which would enable us to invest in companies that really are showing promise, have a market opportunity to make an economic impact here, and specifically that may want to set up an office here in Cuyahoga County. And of course, we also want to be able to connect them with our local research partners, such as PACE and Cleveland State, also in the county, that can provide potential access to research dollars in partnership, as well as lab space and additional prototyping types of supports. So let me give you a little bit of insight on what I mean by test beds and our open innovation programming. We launched in 2021 an open innovation challenge, which basically had me sitting down with 6 different utilities and talking with them about where do we need innovations. The whole idea of open innovation challenges is to say there may be a lot of innovation out there, but where do we actually need solutions? So we're not always interfacing with people who've had a eureka in the lab, but not necessarily something that's useful for where we really need to solve a problem. So these utilities worked with me about how do we identify lead pipe service lines without breaking ground. Lead pipe service lines are the lines that may be connected to a water main running down the middle of your street. And those lines then connect from that main line to the individual homes or apartment buildings to provide water from our drinking water utility. And some of those lines may be comprised of lead, and others may be galvanized steel, and others may be copper. But we learned from the Flint, Michigan crisis that changes to the water or changes to the chemistry of the treatment of water can actually have a disruptive effect on the pipes and result in a toxic combination of water. And as a result of that lesson learned, the US federal government has stepped in and basically put into place new federal rules mandating that utilities across the country identify where there are lead service lines and replace them. Now, this is a very expensive investment to make for any utility. This wasn't planned. And generally speaking, the records of when these lines were put into place are decades old. So certainly, if wherever it's documented on paper, but it's also documented very inconsistently. And so utilities are really running into a pretty big project of how are they going to afford to identify these lines. Today, the only way to identify a lead pipe is by digging it up. Here in Cuyahoga County, the City of Cleveland Division of Water has over 100,000 connections, which may or may not, any one of them, include a lead pipe going into a home. And so currently the estimate of about $700 per connection that would be required to dig it up and identify whether or not it's actually lead is an amount of money that we just don't have. And cities around the country don't have it either. So we put together what we call a request for technologies last year in 2021 to come up with solutions that could detect lead service lines without breaking ground. Maybe it would be something like you see a metal detector that someone waves, over sand on the beach when they're walking around on the beach. That could be what it looks like. It could be something else. What we found was we had a wide range of respondents, again, from around the world that had a real interest in helping us to solve this problem. And by creating this Open Innovation Challenge, what we're essentially doing is saying, here in Greater Cleveland, we are trying to solve a really big problem, and we are going to host you to solve it here in this region. Working with Cleveland Water developed what you see here on the left, what we call a pipe farm. It's located in Carmel. This is essentially a simulated distribution system. There's a main pipe right here with different connected pipes, which would simulate the lines that go to homes. And each of these pipes are made up of different materials and buried under different pieces or types of substrate, like gravel or sand or maybe pavement. All of this is buried underground. So as exciting as this is, you actually can't see it. If you went there, you would just see sort of an empty piece of ground. But what this is now is an asset in the Cleveland Water Alliance test bed in partnership with Cleveland Water, which we now can offer to organizations around the world to come and trial their solution to see if it will solve a problem that has a demand from a market across the United States and a very high demand for solutions as soon as possible. So there are some things that we're really trying to do with how we are designing our programming that are very specifically focused on safeguarding this region and our health and our assets and our resilience. And there are a few things that we've also learned in the process of implementing these projects. One of them is this particular project, for example, we knew was going to take more than 1 year to solve. And so one of the things that we are looking to do with our funds from this ask is to actually enable us to support a multi-year approach to open innovation challenges like this one, so that we can actually provide innovators that come up with a concept for a solution, but don't yet necessarily have a prototype this is something where we feel we can add some additional support to innovators. And again, pull that innovator in to access all of these other assets and research supports that can help them to solve this problem here. I'm going to tell you about a second part of our test bed. Second part of our test bed is again focused on Lake Erie specifically. And as I mentioned, we have this history on the Cuyahoga River. We also have a history with Lake Erie specifically, because this is in fact the shallowest and most climate vulnerable of the Great Lakes. And it's also the most biodiverse and the most vulnerable to fluctuating changes just of the industries and uses that we already have today. So as all of you know, we have agriculture along the shores of our lake, and we also have different manufacturing interests that have used our lake historically, as well as a whole range of community and recreational interests that we have in our lake. And we've had an incredible history of cleaning our lake and evolving how we use it and how we manage it. Well, one of the things that we are seeing with climate impact is that our water levels are rising, and we also are seeing warmer temperatures in the lake. And as a result of that, more dynamic, different types of responses to some of the runoff in our lakes, such as harmful algal blooms. And so what we are looking to do is to enable the deployment of more ways to monitor and proactively alert when there are different conditions on the lake. So for example, early warning systems for harmful algal blooms are very much in process in our Western Basin. But we also are interested in changes of oxygen levels, such as hypoxia specifically in the Central Basin, which affects our drinking water, and what chemicals and how treatment occurs to the water that we drink every day. These are the types of things that are going to be more and more important to ensure the resilience of Lake Erie over the years to come, is to be able to track and better understand the nuances of different changing conditions. So one of the things that Cleveland Water Alliance has been doing specifically with the state of Ohio dollars that I mentioned a little bit earlier is investing in the telecommunications backbone that is stretching over Lake Erie, which would enable us to deploy sensors that can give us that real-time feed of information on a whole range of different things, from wind temperature and wave height to pH, conductivity, turbidity, phosphorus, nitrates, nitrites, ammonium, all kinds of additional things, also including a specific interest, for example, on E. coli contaminants, which, as we all know, can sometimes result in closing down our beloved beaches on hot days like this. So as you can see in this picture, these little heat maps are actually representative of the types of telecommunications coverage that Cleveland Water Alliance is trying to enable over Lake Erie, so that we have the flexibility to deploy sensors all along our water bodies of water. And this represents investments to date. However, the state of Ohio dollars have enabled us to actually purchase the equipment, telecommunications equipment, such that by the end of 2023, this is the coverage that we will see over Lake Erie. And what that also means is that we can deploy sensors across a wide range of different interests, not just water properties or biological nutrients or even contaminants, but also potentially to support additional evolutions in our maritime and other commercial interests. With some of our dollars, we purchased already over 100 different Internet of Things devices that will be deployed over the course of this summer into the end of the year. And these devices all feed information that is made available to organizations like Cleveland Water to help them track hypoxia, for example, and how they can safely ensure our water treatment, but also to universities to further deepen the expertise at organizations like Cleveland State and CASE in how they build their capacity around the water industry of the future. And as a result of that, that means that we have, through open innovation and the test bed work that we're doing, we have magnets to attract solutions providers from around the world to make use of our assets, to trial their technologies and perfect the way they're creating solutions. And providing this innovation ecosystem around it makes it not only interesting for them to trial their technologies here, but they can then trial it and tweak their technologies and then trial and test it again and again. And it becomes very convenient with these additional innovation ecosystem supports to just set up shop here and create jobs here. And that's what we're looking to do. So for this investment, number 3, the dollars will go to equipment, staff, contractor capacity, a little bit of support for our hub space so that we have a place for innovators to stay and do business out of, as well as some direct program of investments, such as the ability to put some money towards innovators that have a concept and want to create a prototype to test at our test beds. And also around things like connectivity and equipment. So I'm going to walk you through our spend a little bit more slowly here. On connectivity and equipment, I want to talk for just a moment about the IoT Test Bed Footprint here, specifically in this county. So what I showed you a little bit earlier actually was focused on Lake Erie overall, the Lake Erie watershed, that we're able to provide place for companies to trial technologies in ponds or streams or on beaches or out in the middle of the lake. But one of the things that we discovered talking with utilities is that the adoption of real-time Internet of Things sensors, things that can actually provide information in real time based on changing conditions, has been a challenge for utilities to adopt because of the fact that historically they need to have their own dedicated cell line, for example. And that can mean that it's a monthly bill that we all get our own cell lines. It can be extremely expensive. So these are the types of things we want to invest in here with the rest of our partners, and also to provide operational sustainability over the long term. So as I mentioned, we had 50 new contacts just in the last few weeks, and we need to ensure we've got the staff to follow up and land them. There are a lot of costs of inaction, but what I really want to focus on is let's just take action and realize our vision. Make Cuyahoga County a global leader in the water economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, it's a lot of information coming all at once. This is the first time we've had, as a committee, to even get a presentation at all about this concept and these ARPA dollars, which are significant and multifaceted uses. And I think we do have questions from committee members. Sharon.
First, congratulations on taking on this, because obviously, at least obviously to me, one of the things is that water is the most important element of life out there, as far as as far as sustainability. And so I think that that's I had to be congratulated. That was actually our leadership class of Leadership Cleveland. We actually focused on this same very topic, and so congratulations on that. And also congratulations, we've decided we are not shipping our water outside of our region. I think that is, if you want to look at errors in the background, that's what happened, I believe, out in the West Coast. They shipped it to all kinds of other applications, at least as I recall my science, that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be put into different forms. So water can become ice, water can become steam, but water cannot be eliminated. It goes someplace else. And in this particular case, it sounds like, whether it's a bad thing or a good thing, we're the recipients of water coming to our area. And I think that ultimately, the more you control of that, the better off we're going to be. We'll figure out what we're going to do with it, but I think it's obviously a good thing that, because I think it's going to be the source of life for everything out there. So my hat's off to that. A couple questions, and some of it are just esoteric questions. How did Intel end up in Columbus, where they don't have a source of water, but yet water, they need, at least my understanding of this $20 billion to put a plant in, they consume hundreds of millions, they don't consume, they use hundreds of millions of gallons of water to make, I mean, Sonny's got a chip in that phone. Just to make that chip, I think it's, my understanding is it's probably about 1 billion gallons of water just to make each one of these cell phones that we're using. So how did they get that? How did they win that one? And where's their water coming from for that project?
Yeah, Councilman, and I think EB may have a better answer for this, but I don't know. I mean, I think
Not coming from us, I hope. That's what
there's a lot
I'm
of, but I think there's a lot of concern about how did that project happen? How did we not know about it? How weren't we consulted on it? And I think the county executives got real questions about that as well.
Yeah, the economics, there's the economic piece of where the land and the dirt and all that, but ultimately, there's an awful lot of water that gets, to make a computer chip, it is one of the biggest users of water in the world to make computer chips. Now, I've at least got some education that they don't consume it, they reuse it and reuse it and reuse it many, many, many times, but they have to have a source of water that's just hundreds and hundreds of millions of gallons of water to run that plant.
Yeah, Councilman, I agree. And I think that's a question that I don't know that they've answered yet down there.
I think you got somebody from
Team Neo,
maybe.
Neil is
Christine
going to throw you a
Nelson.
lifeline, I think, at least, maybe. Because there's no question that the computer chips, we're only 12% of the computer chip consumption right now in the United States is made in the United States. We're going to get to 30, 40, 50, 60%. So there's going to be a lot more opportunities to do that, I would think, maybe here in Northeast Ohio.
Yeah, so Ohio is pretty rich in water all throughout it. There's a big aquifer in the Dayton-Columbus area.
Okay.
And there are reservoirs and reserves and things that have been set aside for water. So they do need to build a new plant, which is very different. The advantage that we would have here in Northeast Ohio is, so if you think about an Intel-sized semiconductor fabrication plant, they're going to use anywhere between like 30 to 45 million gallons a day.
Right.
That, to equate that for you, is about 300,000 residential users a day. Is
They're
what
gonna
the
use or
plant would use.
consume? So
So 300,000 residential users use about that same amount of water in a day as these plants will use in a day. Just to give you some kind of way to think about it. What's really beneficial to us is that we have the overbuilt infrastructure here, where right now Cleveland's water is running about half capacity on 3 plants. So they have not only have the water, but we have not only the water coming in straight from Lake Erie, but we have the infrastructure within our current water and sewer treatment plants to serve something that big.
So they had a source for Intel for
They have a
their
source
first
for the
20 billion, but
water.
this is going to be a $100 billion project. It's
Right.
going to go 5 times the size of the current project right now.
Yeah, so they have a source of water because Ohio is rich in water throughout the state. What they needed to build, what they are building right now is the water and sewer capacity, is the structures to support that water, to get
Not
it
using
in.
any of ours.
Right, not using any Lake Erie water. No,
Okay.
that does not go any further south than Akron, I think,
Okay.
because of the watershed.
And you were talking about waste. My understanding is the Big Dig. the reason why it's so large is because there is so much wasted water in the processing because our piping system has leaks, and we're leaking from probably, I'm not sure where we are on that, but I've heard the numbers as much as 10 to 15% of the water we process gets wasted, goes back in, and never gets used because of all the leakage on the way through that whole big dig process. I mean, if we could just solve that, it would produce enough water for an awful long time. Any thoughts about whether AB is any of this looking at our waste in just the piping leakage that's going on in the system in the big dig?
I don't know if Edie
So,
has an answer to that. Yeah.
Because I've read some
I'll-
studies
I'll-
on it, that the amount of leakage is huge coming through the big dig project.
We do have leakage for absolutely here in the region. And I'll tell you something that we can focus on any one of these issues. That's certainly an issue that could be a significant priority focus for the region. Historically speaking, we have had so much water here in this region that it has not been one of the bigger priorities. The bigger priorities over the last several decades has really been on water quality, and that's been an appropriate place for us to focus on. But we have a really strong coalition of players to focus on all kinds of different challenges, including the leakage challenge.
So sadly, in front of my building, my fact, when the rain comes and the toilet gets flushed, it all goes to the same place, and we're cleaning up 3 times as much water as what we need to, because the rainwater is just is not something. If we could figure that out too. I mean, it just seems like we got some great opportunities to solve to have pure drinking water that doesn't mix with our sewage water, but yet we're running it all in the same pipe, and we've been doing it for what, 75, 80 years. 100 years? Okay, well, I'm not that old. I'm 75, but I can't date. It just seems like we got some other target-rich environments that if we could figure them out, that we could be solving our water problem without even doing a lot of the other stuff we're talking about here. So I throw those out as some topics.
Thank you. Questions from President Jones?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is, the 1.45 million that's being provided over the next 2 years, can you speak to what you see as the level of success you'll have over the next 2 years? How many companies, have you measured how many companies you think you may be able to attract, or what does that look like over the next 2 years? What can we expect?
Well, I'll speak from the water solutions side of this, and I'll leave the Team NEO, my Team NEO colleague for the water intensive. In all cases of attraction, this is a long game, particularly for the larger corporations that are going to be represented by water intensive. That said, I would say, just based on the trip that I had over the last couple of weeks meeting with companies, we specifically focused on companies that do not have a U.S. presence. So our positioning is to focus on Greater Cleveland as the entry point into the U.S. market for water solutions companies. And we also are specifically, for the time being, focused on IoT sensor types of companies. And the reason for that is, number one, it's one of the fastest growing subsectors of the water industry. So these are high growth opportunities. And secondly, it's also much easier for us to accommodate test sites and demonstration sites for these types of companies than for, like, say, a chemical company, which requires permits and all kinds of, additional sort of risk management, insurance types of concerns. With that in mind, we are actually projecting 1 to 2 dozen over probably the next 5 years to actually land here. That's, in terms of how many we touch and how many jobs that translates to, I'm not sure I actually have that off the top of my head, but it could be quite significant. And it's like I say, the water industry itself is actually adding jobs throughout the recession, and we're averaging around 300 jobs here just in the county per year over the last several years.
You mentioned, Dr. Eby, you mentioned adding jobs. Were you also adding companies, or were these just jobs to the existing companies here?
For the statistic that we gave earlier, the 300 or so jobs over the last couple of years, those have primarily been existing companies here. But in terms of adding new companies, that would be the 1 to 2 dozen over the next few years that I mentioned.
Okay. I think what I'm hearing in your presentation, it was very thorough. I thank you for the presentation. What I'm hearing is we're building the capacity, investing right here into the capacity to attract these companies. Is that a good description of what this money will help to be a part of?
That's correct.
Okay. With that, why could these international companies not come to any other city around any of the Great Lakes? What is our competition like around the Great Lakes? Are there other cities who have made a similar investment or a greater investment than we're considering?
So, yes, there is one other city that is actually located in the Great Lakes that is also pursuing attraction of international companies for the water economy, and that's Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We have a couple of advantages over Milwaukee. The first is that we actually have this US EDA grant, so we were chosen over Milwaukee for our economic impact focus for this project to really grow this region's economy around the water industry. The second is, if you remember the map that I showed you of this telecommunications backbone that Cleveland Water Alliance is working to build across Lake Erie, there is nothing like that in the world. And it is a world-class asset for attracting international companies to this region. That said, it's something we will need to continue to nurture and evolve and maintain. And so it's something where, with this investment that we're talking about with all of you here, this is something that we want to ensure we are leveraging in a very timely fashion to start bringing companies in as soon as possible to leverage this world-class investment.
How successful has Milwaukee been in attracting companies? How many have they attracted to their city area?
So Milwaukee has been at this longer than the city, than the Cleveland Water Alliance. They've been around longer. They had some fairly early, so I think they've been around for about 15 years now, maybe a little bit longer. And they had some fairly early successes. Essentially, one of the things that they did that was very smart was they established a building right up front, which enabled companies they attracted to set up an address here in the US. How that actually translated to adding jobs remains very unclear. Much of their budget over the years has been spent on marketing and not necessarily on substance. Over the last 3 years, during the pandemic, there has been some loss of business out of Wisconsin, out of the Milwaukee area, as I understand it. But they do continue to also focus on a parallel strategy, just without some of this world-class asset that we have that I discussed earlier.
Tell me about the collaboration. What part does Team NEO, the Water Alliance, what roles do you all play in the collaboration?
So I can answer from the Team NEO perspective. So we're focused primarily in the tactic number 1, which is the attracting water-intensive users, right? So we're really looking at this grant will allow us to get some consultative services around taking that deep dive into where are these companies. The more successful we can be in business attraction, we really need to know who to target, right? Our pitch can be as succinct as possible if we know that we're targeting the right people. If we just go out and talk to 100 companies just at random, we're probably not going to have a very good return on investment there, right? So this allows us to do the research and the study that we need to do to say, who are all of the players in this water-intensive industry across the world, who are water-intensive industries, and then who has the best business case? You know, who does Northeast Ohio match up with? Who does the Cleveland area match up with best as a business case perspective? And that's researching their financial statements, researching their latest press releases, researching their customers, their suppliers, to really start to narrow in on those targets so that we do make those pitches, they're the right 100 companies for that return on investment. And so that's the part that we'll come to, is all of the other assets that would drive a decision for a company to locate in the Cleveland area, to bringing that all together with the water capacity that we have, and with that business case all together, being able to identify those companies who would be most successful here and who we can talk to about why this is a good, low-risk, low-cost option for them, for their US, their Midwest, their whatever investment. That would be the piece that Team NEO would play. This is one part of that, on identifying those water-intensive industries. At the same time, we're working with our Talent Development Council and colleges and universities to understand graduates and what those industries will need from a talent perspective and what curriculums we have that match up with it. We're working with the Department of Development here at the county and others to identify what land those folks would need and where we can put them. And you know, what kind of redevelopment or creative reuse we can do with land here in the county and surrounding areas, so that it's an entire package then. But this piece of it really helps us to target those right companies and have the best return on investment from those discussions.
My last question is, it sounds like you're targeting the international companies more so than local companies. Is that?
So we'd be targeting anyone across the world, so US for sure. So we'd be looking at those companies that are water intensive that may not be as successful right now on the coast. So, you know, we talk a lot about reshoring, but coastal shoring is also something that's come up quite a bit, where we're attracting companies from the West Coast and the East Coast, in this case, probably more the West Coast. We also would be looking at divisions of companies, right? We're probably not going to move an entire company here. It's who has the best option to be successful here and has the right mix where they could put their second, their third, their 90th plant in the Cleveland area and be a good fit for all of the other assets that we have.
Thank you. Any questions, committee? Well, I want to ask the committee first. Councilman Miller? Jack, are you finished? No?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I would suggest putting Lubrisol on your list. You had a list of fluid-based companies there. Berkshire Hathaway has a big checkbook, so I would highly suggest that. On your test bed slide, I was having a hard time looking at that because it was the Blue Economy Innovative Partners ecosystem is what it was on your Erie. And there were 35, as I quickly added it up, of nonprofits on that one slide, and only 5 companies that Team NEO would be pursuing, it seems like. Just from a marketing standpoint, my suggestion would be to have the businesses dominate the slide, as opposed to looking like they're off in the upper right-hand corner, and have the nonprofits be diluted a considerably amount if you're presenting that to try and bring them here in town. Just no business likes to say, oh, geez, I'm going to be caught up in this huge mirage of all these other nonprofits, because I'm going to get lost in the mix. And we all know that all those have to be funded some way, and you would like to not think that. So I'm just giving you my brush of as far as what I saw, the way it went as far as that. Our group of Leadership Cleveland did go to Milwaukee, because for this very exact reason. And one of the things that they did, as far as giving you some feedback, they linked the residential water use with the business water use and the housing water use. So they really brought it all together and said, this is why you want to be here in Milwaukee because water is an important component. You can live on the water, you can recreation on the water, you can use the water for your business. So that was and they made a point of the Chamber of Commerce taking us up and down all the avenues where all the housing stock was being built, and it was pretty darn impressive. So it said to me, water was important to Milwaukee, and if that's our competition, we've got the ability to do all those same things here, I think, and create that right vision, because I know I saw some things on that today as far as what was going on downtown, as far as potentially on the water use at GCP, as far as that whole program. And then my comment on the IoT, the IoT, if we're focusing on that, AB, that's a sensing device that goes into the water to check that out. That is not where the big jobs are going to come from, I don't think. Those are going to be, and ironically, if you're really successful in developing IoT, it's going to go help somebody else around the country, and it's going to be a competitor to us as far as the IoT. Yeah, we want to use it in our own lake, but my suggestion is to focus on people like the Connecticut you had on the slide. Those are the people who are going to create jobs, who process the water, that their equipment is going to be sold all over the world, and it is sold all over the world. So that would be my suggestion, because the IoT is more for the R&D piece of the business. Yeah, you're going to sell some IoT interfaces out there, and then my only last comment is we're all looking for energy in different sources. If we can figure out how to get those businesses here, they're going to break out that hydrogen molecule out of the water and produce power out of that. It will set us all into a different realm, and Sonny and I will join at the hip at that point in time as far as energy efficiency. If you can get that hydrogen molecule out of our water, and we've got the water here to produce power, I think that would be a place that R&D would be unbelievable if we could figure that out. So thank you.
Thank you.
I do think that just a couple of quick comments on your notes, which I just so appreciate. One is with the hydrogen molecule, one of the things that we would want to keep our eye on there is that breaking the hydrogen molecule out of the water that we have would potentially end up having that resource shipped out of our region. So we'd want to be careful about that. But with regard to the IoT side thing, the actual manufacture of IoT devices is what we're looking at as the jobs adder here. And so just as we look at, for example, Intel in Columbus, there are manufacturing of sensor devices that we could, very realistically foster here in the region. And so while use of those devices could go anywhere in the world, the manufacture of them is something where we really think we have a great regional strength to offer to that mix.
And I encourage that. It's just the end use of that IoT is going to be to help somebody else's water to compete with us for those same jobs at some point. But that's a 10-year strategy. Concerned about that. I don't want to ever help my competition, whether it's Milwaukee or Los Angeles or any of those folks.
Thank you. So I'm going to head over to Councilman Miller, and we have about 5 minutes.
So, first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for a very detailed and a very hopeful presentation for our economic future. And to Ms. Holst, I'd ask if you could send us the slides. There was a lot of information there, and I'd like to be able to go through them again. So if you could do that, it would be helpful. And the one major question area I have is we've done very well covering the economic development and business attraction side. My question is about the water protection side. What are the most important things that you anticipate doing and believe that we ought to do to ensure that that Lake Erie remains a strong asset for our region for the long-term future?
Thank you. Thank you for such a thoughtful question. I think that enabling us to have a much more refined view of our water quality conditions is absolutely critical. As I think Mike Foley mentioned at the very start of this presentation, we're seeing some interesting things on water level, and water level is going to impact a lot of different decisions, from, you know, erosion issues to runoff, and how we're dealing with harmful algal blooms. So this sort of smart watershed that we're building, I think, will really help that. But the insights will also tell us some, you know, some needs for intervention that we have yet to figure out. And so one of the big things in my mind is that we operationalize how we're sharing data amongst the stakeholders around our Lake Erie watershed. And that work is underway, but it's going to be critical, I think, for our long-term health of our Great Lake.
Thank you very much, and that's all I have, Madam Chair.
Okay. So I would like to come back to committee. This is going to be held. It's a lot of information. I am also, thank you very much, Councilman Miller, for talking about the protection end of things. And this appears that there's data collected that somehow, you know, is going to convert into protection, but I want to hear more about that piece. And we spent like over an hour talking about economic development potential, and I'd like to spend an hour about how we're going to protect the watershed. Okay, so that's how I'm going to end it, but it's a much broader conversation, at least as I see it. So thank you. I'm going to conclude. There's no miscellaneous business. I'm going to adjourn, and we'll come back to ask more questions and get more of an elaborate presentation on that piece. Mike Foley, Director Foley?
Just in 2 weeks, is that?
I don't know. Let you know.
Okay.
Potentially.
Yeah, great, thank you. Yeah. Okay, great, thank you. I appreciate it.